Britt Benjamin. I'm a professor in the Johnson County Community College in the fashion program.
I'm Audrey Michaelis, and I'm also a professor in fashion at Johnson County Community College.
And we have Gigi Delaney here today. She was a professor in fashion at Johnson County Community College. And Gigi came in about 6 months ago with a group into the historical fashion collection that we have on campus, and was speaking about things, clothing, how they were constructed back in the day, and how important that was and what they were doing. And I felt like we need to bring Gigi in and talk about the garments. And so we pulled some garments today and asked her and her background and her fashion experience throughout her whole life.
Well, I didn't have necessarily a lot of formal fashion experience as a younger person, but I was fortunate in that I lived in New Jersey, in Jersey City, right across the river from New York. And the fashion industry and the fashion scene in New York is totally different than it is in the rest of the country. New York has always been the fashion capital of this country. And this isn't to sound like New York is better than, it's just what they do there. And I was much more aware of fashion living there than I would have been here. I can see that as we've moved around the country, I can see the difference. People are much more aware of fashion in New York. And I happen to be the oldest grandchild on my paternal side. And I had 3 aunts who thought I was their little doll to dress up and play with. So by the time I was 3, I was quite aware of, dressing up for this occasion or that occasion and the different things that you would wear. And at one point, I've been told a story about myself that I must have overheard my aunts talking about another adult and commenting that she was wearing white shoes and it was after Labor Day. And you just did not do that. Now, I'm 3 years old. I didn't realize the ramifications of that. But it went into my head and it stayed there. And a few times later when they were dressing me up, they brought me out my little white Mary Janes to wear. And I just threw a fit. I said, I can't wear those. It's after Labor Day. So that's when I realized, or in hindsight, I can look back and see how I was influenced just by the fashion environment in that part of the country.
So can you talk about in your childhood how people just characterized their clothing? How do people care for their clothing? How did they feel about clothing growing up compared to kind of what we have now?
Okay. Well, it was very different. I was born in 1934, which was the middle of the Depression. There was no extra money. There was no extra clothing. And clothing was handled entirely differently than it is now. First of all, you spent a larger portion of your income on your clothing. Clothing was more expensive than it is now. But it was better quality, and it lasted. An outfit was going to serve at least 2 people. It would get passed on to a sister or a cousin or a friend. So clothing was much more durable than it is. And while it took a greater percentage of your income, because it was well made and passed around families, you probably spent less than you would think because of the cost. Now we have more of a disposable clothing attitude. We don't expect it to last. We don't necessarily share it. And some people would turn their noses up at that concept. So it's not as durable as it was or as well utilized.
So in your childhood, Gigi, you were part of the experience of, you were during the war. And so how did the war affect your childhood growing up and your perception of clothing and whether or not it was important?
It was a very somber time during the war. Particularly, I think we were more aware of the war going on because there were so many shipyards, shipbuilding. We could drive by on the bus and see the boats being built for the war. There were many Army and Navy bases where they went for training. So the war was a very present thing in our lives. We were very much aware of it. There was no frivolity. Paris was occupied, so they weren't making any garments. And New York wasn't as that involved, but the fabric was not available. The fabric was going to parachutes and uniforms. And what people don't realize, I can remember my aunts complaining because they couldn't get stockings. They couldn't get nylon stockings because it was going to the parachutes. And there just was not a lot of extra during the war. And so when the war ended, we hadn't had new fashion designs in 7 years. And everything was, you know, practical. There was no frivolity whatsoever in clothing at that time. So when the war ended, and there were rumblings in New York wanted to displace Paris as far as being the fashion capital of the world. And New York was a far cry from that at that time in history. They were good. They had a good, you know, clothing repertoire, but Paris had been doing it for so many years that, you know, there was no way New York was going to displace Paris. But the slate was clean. There was no preconceived ideas of how fashion was going to proceed from this point. And it took a year or two even before people got back to normal, that there was extra money to spend on a little bit of frivolity. And of course, you know, specialness in clothing started, because none of the designers had been designing during the war. There was no clothing lines coming out every year. So it took a year or two before things started to come together in the idea who was going to be the designers after the war and what form was that going to take. And the first thing that showed up was the poodle skirt. And Dior, he seemed to take the lead, and things went, he developed that poodle skirt, and everyone loved it. We would wear that with our brown and white or black and white saddle shoes and bobby socks. That was the uniform of the time.
So he created the silhouette, and then
Yes.
the poodle skirt was kind of following that Dior silhouette.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And there was a lot of criticism of him because the mindset of scarcity was still very prevalent, and he was criticized for making those big circular skirts because they used so much fabric.
Right.
But he said, I make women happy.
And you probably needed that. I'm
Right.
sure Europe did.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what did you wear under their garments to
Well,
keep that
there were
shape?
all sorts of petticoats
Okay.
underneath the garments. There were crinolines, and they were stiff. They were itchy and scratchy, and but you had to wear them to make the skirt stick out the way, to get that silhouette.
That's fun.
So how old were you when you were wearing the poodle skirt look?
Well, I was 12 years old when the war ended.
Okay.
And took 2 years before they got down to the general population. So it was probably just about as I was going into high school in '48
Okay.
when I got my first poodle skirt. And over to New York we went, and the places that we shopped, we had, of course, Macy's. That's their headquarters.
Right.
So we would be, that would be one of the places we would shop. There was Saks, and there was Lord & Taylor. Both of them were higher end. And then there was S. Klein. Klein was our discount store.
Oh.
We didn't necessarily have discount stores. And Klein's was the place that bought the overstocks from other stores, from manufacturers, and that was the bargain hunter's place. So we did a lot of shopping there because the pricing was very good.
But you were buying real stuff. It just was
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
last season or
Well,
marked
it might have
down.
been big chain went out of business,
Okay.
or it was the overstock of
Yeah.
the of all of the clothing industry in that area, and so they could afford to sell it at a discount. And Klein's is still in business;
Okay. Wow.
they're still there.
So when you were in high school, did most people shop at department stores? Did a large percent of people still sew for themselves at that time?
There was a lot of home sewing because, again, coming off the Depression, it took a while for the economy to stabilize after the war, and it took a while for the returning servicemen to be assimilated back into the workforce. The women did not want to go back into the kitchen. They liked having an income, and they weren't too anxious to give up their jobs. So it took a while for the economy to stabilize, but in so doing, that gave the extra money to spend on some clothing.
Yeah.
Now, clothing at that time was of a much higher quality of manufacture. The finished product was much more polished than what we have today. We had mass production, but the quality was higher in the finishing of it. And like there is today, there are all price ranges. Most people were still quite strapped financially. It took a while for the effects of the Depression to wear off.
This is the poodle set that we have in the collection, and it's a cardigan wool knit with the poodle motif applique, and then it's a felted wool skirt, again with the poodle applique from the late 40s, early 50s.
This dress is from American designer James Galanos, and it is a 1950s shirt dress style with a convertible collar, button front, and a pleated skirt that's in an engineered yarn-dyed stripe. Gigi, you were just talking about how important it was that people took good care of their clothes and that they were well made so they could last through future generations. Can you speak to the quality of the workmanship from the 50s through this Galanos dress we have here?
Well, this dress, for one thing, is showing us the underpinnings of mathematics in clothing design. There is a lot of mathematics in garment design to keep proportion and ratio similar to that of the body. And you can see the attention to detail. All of these little pleats are lined up and line exactly with the design of the stripe. The stripe is basically giving the foundation to this garment design. Now, inside, there's an organza underlining here that gives body to the garment. It's not down here because of the fullness of the skirt. The fullness of the skirt itself will support the skirt. So it was not at all unusual to have organza underlining in a garment. The detailing and the finishing work was much more a part of the garment at that time. This was before sergers. And I don't know whether you're familiar with a serger or not, but a serger is extensively used in manufacturing garments today to finish off the edges of the seams. Whereas here, they were finished off by folding and sewing a little hem in them. Also, fit was much more important. As you can see here, you have a dart here going into the bust, but you also have a dart coming from the armhole, like this, into the bust, which we don't do anymore. We don't have an armhole dart anymore. So this part of the garment currently does not fit as well. And in using this particular fabric, they were meticulous in using the actual weave structure of the lines to line things up and sew them on so that it fit right in with the stripe.
And it not only fit, but they didn't have to seam the stripe
Yes,
in,
no,
so they could
that's
keep
right.
the stripe uninterrupted. So it was a win-win, kind of.
Absolutely. And it fits the body closer than what we would get today. But this is an example of the geometry, basically, of how geometry has been applied into the design of this garment.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's engineered earlier. Yeah.
And now, look at this hem.
This is insane.
This
I'm
is an
sorry.
8 or 10 inch hem.
Yes.
So why would they do this, Gigi?
For body, to make the skirt stand out at the bottom, to give it
For
body.
weight and stuff?
Pardon?
For like weight, volume, to that aspect? I mean, this
fullness.
is extremely expensive to do. You wouldn't do that today.
Right.
It would hang better and give it more volume.
It gives it stability at the bottom. It makes this stand out. It makes it stronger. So it's going to hold its shape away from the body. And with a petticoat underneath it, that would help maintain that.
So you could also give it to your really tall sister.
So Gigi, do you think it's kind of odd that this wasn't like, these look raw fit? You know, do you think that's, I mean, this is,
Well, we didn't have sergers.
oh,
yet.
right. You
We
just did
didn't
say
have-
that.
But
Okay.
they leave the seam allowance out. Was that so that, because this looks like actually it was altered for probably a different person.
It
You can
might
see
have
the
been.
previous stitches.
It might have been
brought up.
This
do you think
might
the
have been
lining-
shortened.
If the lining, nowadays we would clean finish this with the lining, you wouldn't see the seam allowance. Was
That's
it more
correct.
common to leave the seam allowance out so that you could alter it, or why did
Yes,
they do that?
Right, for changing size.
Okay.
If you get into costume
Yes.
design, in a costume, you're going to find 2-inch seams
Yes.
because they expect to be altering that for various people to wear it. And that would be why they have a 2-inch seam. They can make that 2 sizes bigger.
Okay.
This probably was altered and taken up at the waist.
It looks like
Oh,
it. You
you're
can see.
absolutely right.
By,
Yeah.
right, by someone, and yet you can't even tell if that was done on the outside. The precision at which these pleats are made is amazing,
Yes, it is.
and how they maintain that line.
So too, I don't know if you can get this, but it's the designer's Galanos, and then the department store is Wolf Brothers. So
Wolf Brothers.
that was a Kansas City department store, and they put both labels in the garments back then. So this is American ready-to-wear, because we just talked about it being from a department store. You had some experience with French couture, but how do you see them similar construction as French couture?
No.
Okay.
No.
No.
In a French couture garment, there isn't a single machine stitch. Everything is sewn by hand. And the hand sewing allows the garment to drape and fall into alignment with the form of the body. So they don't, on the couture house garments, not on the ready-to-wear as it comes down that chain, but on a garment from a couture house in Paris, there isn't a single machine stitch, not even in the lining.
This is a Lillian coat, which was an American manufacturer. It is in a wool twill with a slub type of yarn, basically a novelty yarn. So this is an unbelievable weave. And you can speak to this because you are a weaver by trade. Okay.
Right. There are a number of different things that can define a garment. Sometimes it's color. Sometimes it's seaming design. Sometimes it's just the style of it. The thing that defines this garment is certainly the color, but also the weave structure, the way it is woven. It's not just a plain, straight weave. It's a twill, and the colors accent the design of the weave structure. See, this is what makes the twill. It's not just a straight across yarn.
So if people don't know, you can see this is herringbone, so it's a diagonal lines is what you're
Right.
talking about. The diagonal lines show you that it's a twill.
And it has the herringbone. This is the herringbone design. The yarn is a very thick yarn. It's big around. It's not a small, and that would result in a rather loose weave of the fabric. It would not have a lot of stability, and it would easily fall out of shape.
It would be hard to sew because of that.
Very
weave. Yeah.
hard to sew.
Yep.
What they did here, they used a canvas underlining to give this loose weave fabric stability. And that's what makes it keep its shape over the years. I mean, this has been a number of years, and it's still very close to its original shape. It's the canvas underneath here that has given this the stability to hold its shape over all of these years.
Yeah, this is from the 1960s, this piece. And you talked about the silhouette.
Yes. There's so much going on with color and weave structure. You would not want a complicated design that let the different things carry a garment. Let the color and the weave structure be the defining factors on this one. You don't want complicated design. You have complicated weave structure.
Yeah.
Very much so, yes.
So
Focal point.
Yeah, yes.
and you have to play that off. If you have a complicated weave structure, you have a simple design. If you have a complicated design, you would have a very simple, plain weave structure.
So fabric dictates.
Well, a lot of different things dictates.
Okay.
No one thing dictates. Balance. It's, you don't want everything in one garment.
Yes.
You want to, with this beautifully intricate weave structure and color design, you wouldn't want anything more added to defining this garment. But that's why it's balanced. Clothing is architecture for the body. And you wouldn't put everything you know about architecture into one building. You wouldn't do that with a garment.
One would hope not.
It would be ugly if you did.
Right. And that's why they've done this. It's a very simple A-line coat, not even a turned up cuff, and a simple collar.
It's so good.
But it's beautiful.
So good.
The color and the weave structure are just what make this garment.
Yes.
Yeah, and I didn't realize, but we did find a label that the yarn is, or was woven in Scotland, so the yarn is probably
It's
Scotland
probably from
too.
Scotland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this dress is by Norman Norell, and it's an ivory woven wool jumper with an attached navy wool double knit sleeve and collar. And if you look closely at the buttons, there are peace symbol buttons on this as well.
All right, so this Norell, who is a high-end American designer, it's very interesting, and the silhouette's very different than from probably your poodle skirt. So do you have some things to speak to that about?
As we got through the 50s, the conformity that was demanded of people in the 50s was being challenged. It was beginning to be challenged, that we wanted more freedom of choice in our careers. We wanted freedom of choice in the clothing that we wore. And up until this time, that had not been the case. Everything was pretty structured. There wasn't a lot of times people were in a career simply because their father was. They didn't necessarily have the freedom of choice. And that system was beginning to be broken down. Necessarily so, but it was a very frightening time because it was the only system any of us knew. And we didn't know what would replace it. There wasn't a lot of personal freedom. There was not a lot of individuality as we know it today. But there was a great deal of conformity. And that started to break down as we moved into the 60s. And by the time we got to the middle 60s, everything was being challenged. The fact that there's the peace button on here, we would not normally have expressed our feelings or our philosophy. We wouldn't have expressed our philosophy publicly like that. That's when the T-shirts with sayings came into being. There was not that much expression of personal belief systems before that. And that's when that started, middle 60s, and then we moved into the hippie movement where there was really deep rebellion to the point of danger in many instances. I was living in Milwaukee at the time, and the riots in LA had happened, what was that, about 65, maybe 67? I'm not sure of the exact year of that, but it spread all over the country. There were riots in all of the cities. The city of Milwaukee, where I was living at the time, was closed down. No one could come in or go out of the city. And that was done to keep outside influences that were coming in and causing these disruptions from doing that in that city. It handled that particular part of all of that rebellion better than most cities. But gradually, as things began to settle down and there was more of an acceptance of the need to change our systems and our thinking, the clothing became more free. There's not a lot of fit in this particular garment. That's what we got. The chemise. The chemise came in at that time, but which was just a plain dress. The waist was moved down to the hip, but it was a very simple design. And we got more freedom of choice of careers. Careers that had been closed to women gradually began to infiltrate women into them. And that was the beginning of the women's movement. Up until that point, up until it was 1964, when the first female housing was established on an East Coast Ivy League college.
Oh, as far as being able to attend and have a place to live.
there.
And it was only for graduate students. So, you know, females could not go to an Ivy League college. There just was no housing. I don't know what was happening on the West Coast, but I do know, because that was the times when I was coming into the point in my life when I was going to college. And that's when I found out that some colleges I just couldn't go to.
So how did the women's liberation that you're talking about affect you personally? So when these women started getting more rights, were you involved in that? How did you feel about it at the time?
No, I was a homemaker at that point. I had 2 small children, so I was not in the workforce. I know when I started into the workforce, I was very resentful because the only occupations available to me was nursing, teaching, or secretary. Those were the only things that I could do. And it took a long time for that to break down. The fact that the female housing, and I think it was Yale, was the first college to have female housing, and that happened in 1964. And the school opened up only at the graduate level. They didn't think women were mature enough, you know, to
do it.
to do it, right.
That's crazy.
But gradually it opened up and they came into more and more. But it was a very slow process.
Weren't you a member of NOW? Were you a member of any
Yes,
political organizations?
yes, I was a charter member of NOW.
Okay.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
I was like, wait a minute, dude, you got more.
Well, I wasn't in the workforce. I became aware, you know, of the things that the women were trying to do. It certainly influenced me in raising my children, in that I could teach my children that women were just as capable as men of a lot of these jobs, because it was automatically a male-dominant society at that time. The male hierarchy was in charge. I mean, husbands made decisions for wives.
Would your husband have been supportive of you being in the National Organization for Women?
No.
So what would you do? What did you do about that? How did you hide it?
I had to go get a mailbox to get the deliveries of the information that I was getting. I couldn't have it come to the house.
Oh my gosh. You told me that your mom, your grandmother, was your mom or your grandmother a suffragette? Your grandmother.
Both of my grandmothers.
Both of your
They marched for voting, for women to get the vote.
You have a picture of that? I'm kidding.
No. No, I don't know that we had.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
So you've been a women's activist for generations in your
always.
family. Yes. Mhm.
I just grew up thinking I can do whatever is out there that I choose to do. It never occurred to me that I couldn't do it because I was a woman.
Right.
But most women did not think like that. They think, you know, do what you're told.
Yeah. So this was, and so we'll go into the next decade, but this is a time where you, now as you get in, I don't remember what in the 70s when you moved to California and you did go to college.
I went back to school in the 80s.
Okay, okay. So I'm ahead of myself. Okay.
Right. But it was a great help in, my two older children were male, and it was a great help for me to be able to say that the restraints that have been placed on women up till this point were not valid, that they did not have the right to impose restrictions on women just because they were women. So that helped me in raising my children to soften that a little bit, but it took generations. To the point where, you know, a woman could feel she could be a lawyer or a doctor. Those were not necessarily wide open fields that welcomed women with open arms.
So we always found this very odd. This is a high-end American designer, very high-end, Norman Norell, designed for wealthy socialite women, and they have the peace buttons on there. What do you think about that garment?
I am happy to see it, that it existed. And if you look and see how conservatively they ventured into that design.
That's true.
They did a very high quality garment, and the button that is saying they stand for peace is very understated.
Okay.
So the whole piece is understated, but stated.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting.
And you're right, that is one of the early examples of the trickle up.
Probably, as Audrey was saying, yeah.
Right.
The designers are now knocking off the hippies with their political T-shirts.
Right.
Or what the kids on the street are wearing or
Right.
influencing high fashion.
But they're giving it a little class.
Yes, yes. It's true. It's cool. I bring it in class a lot.
Yeah.
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 This is from designer Anne Klein, an American women designer who did separates and became something that women really wanted at this period. And that's a cotton chintz. We might get into the textile in a minute, but Audrey.
Okay, so Gigi, these garments show this idea of kind of mix and match separates. So can you speak to how women dressed evolved from the 60s to the 70s, that now we see not only separates, but we see pants featured?
It expanded the possibilities of the wardrobe into more casual. It used to be much more formal. The separates were well received. Women were so glad to get them. And the print expanded what we considered to be in good taste as far as fabric design. So it was a time of experimentation, particularly with the mix and match, because, you know, people being people will experiment and come up with some good combinations and some not so good combinations. So it was a lot of experimentation, but the experimentation was acceptable. It was okay to experiment, whereas before everything, that era of conformity, everything had to be the same. This gave women a much broader choice, and it made the wardrobe more casual, not quite as formal and structured, and more comfortable.
Yes, yes.
And knits were becoming incorporated into the wardrobe as well. Knits were becoming acceptable, and so were pants. Up until the late 60s and 70s, women did not wear pants the way we wear them today. It was the pantsuit that came out in the 60s that introduced pants into the woman's wardrobe.
Well, on the pants subject, how do you think pants, what was the significance of pants for women? Because of mobility, do you think, or the gender lines?
Well, first of all, they're comfortable. They're warm. It's a warm thing for wintertime. But they're also a variation from a skirt, We get our skirts in different lengths for different years. Sometimes they're long, sometimes they're short. But it gave a variety from the skirt. And they're comfortable.
Yeah, and I know that we're seeing this all the same print, but I'm sure when this whole collection came out, there was solids that went back and forth.
Yes.
This is just what we have in the collection from this.
Yeah, they would have gone
Example
with a
that's
pair of
separate.
black pants or something
Yes,
like that.
yes, or cream top, or yeah.
But they did overdo it on the mixing of prints for a while there.
And I'd like Audrey to talk about the textiles, since she's our textile teacher.
Well, I mean, this looks like it's a chintz style print, which is originally developed in India, printed on cottons. And even at one point in time, chintz were illegal. This was the first kind of fashion police situation that we had on our hands, where people would literally get arrested on the streets for wearing these printed fabrications, because in the late 1700s, people were making jacquard woven fabrics. So this was something that only the elite could afford. So when the people based out of India started printing these chintz fabrics, they were affordable to a wider array of people. So when they first came to some European countries, they were outlawed so that people were not able to afford to kind of look like some of the more aristocratic people who were wearing these very expensive woven jacquards. So it is an interesting fabric. We also see in the 70s, it seems like a lot more of these kind of ethnic inspired prints, where the world's kind of opening a little bit for people. Did you find that in the 70s, the experience for changed from the 60s to the 70s, where now it's more global versus just American?
Yes, that's when a lot of the beautifully colors of the African fabric designs and the beautiful designs of the Oriental, we were getting a much broader variety of design systems into our overall wardrobe.
This is a 1970s Bill Blass polyester jersey with strips of fabric, of jersey fabric, woven on the sleeves, and then it's low on the back. Okay, so this piece is polyester. And what are your beginning thoughts on polyester? When did you first hear about it?
My first exposure to polyester was in the early 60s. I was in a department store, and the fabric or garment salesman was talking to the buyer. And this was the introduction, his first presentation of polyester to this buyer. It was brand new, you know, we didn't have this before. And its basic advantage was it didn't wrinkle, it stretched, and it was comfortable. And the buyer was very reluctant about how this would be received. But and the polyester at that time, when it first came out, did not have all the beautiful qualities that it has now. It of pliable and soft and malleable and all of the things that polyester can do. It was somewhat stiff, but it didn't wrinkle like cotton and particularly linen. So that was one of the advantages. And it was washable.
This piece, being Bill Blass, is kind of a nicer polyester, but yeah, you're right. I mean, we have some stuff in the collection that's feels so great today.
It took a while for us to get adjusted to it.
Well, I think that you had mentioned in the past that people mostly wore knits for undergarments. So I just wanted to see, and now if we asked our students, 90% of them are wearing knits. So I think that I would be curious to see how you see the evolution of knits and why you think they've become so important. Is it because of the fit or the comfort?
The fluidity, the stretch. Mm-hmm. You know, it was a very gradual introduction from underwear to outerwear as far as knits were concerned. We did not have the extensive knits that we have today. We had underwear and t-shirts. and that was about it. The fact that it was made into pants and we can get heavy weights and heavy enough for the fabric to drape nicely on the body. But knits started out as underwear and t-shirts.
When it came out, you said it was kind of, nobody really knew about it. Now we know, now it's 80% of the market, and we now know that it will never biodegrade.
Right.
So maybe not the best environmental choice, we didn't know at the time. But in general, how do you think the quality of these textiles have changed from the past to present? The things that we see now, we pay a lot less money for our clothes, but how about the quality of the actual textiles too, the silk versus the polyester?
Like everything else, it has advantages and disadvantages. The advantages, we can look at the combination, how they've combined polyester with other fabrics. We know how badly linen wrinkles.
Yeah.
You mix polyester with it, and it's a much less wrinkling fabric. So that's an advantage. It makes linen look better on the body, because linen would look like you slept in it 5 minutes after you put it on. It wrinkled so badly. So that's one of the benefits. Plus, other benefits are it made more fabrics washable. If you mixing the cotton and polyester, it eliminated needing to iron it. So it has many advantages.
And that became more widespread in the 70s, because now we have the technology to take the best features of cotton fiber and the best features of the polyester fiber and mix them together to make basically our lives easier for the most part.
Right, and to make very beautiful fabrics.
Yes. Get the features that you want in the fabrics.
Right.
What do you like to sew with?
I like the blends.
You do? Okay.
I don't object to the blended fibers. It depends on the garment
Okay.
that I'm making. Really.
Do you have one favorite fabric to work with?
All my favorite fabric is wool. Wool is so versatile. It can be very heavy in the coat fabric, and like the coat we saw. You can get wool in so fine that it's as sheer as organza.
Wow, yeah.
So it runs the whole gamut. Wool has a good drape. It conforms to the body nicely. So wool is my favorite, and silk would be my second favorite.
And when it's silk satin or silk strapless,
Well,
you don't mind sewing with it?
Silk is a fiber.
Yes.
Satin is a weave structure. So
You're speaking to the church over here.
We try to teach our students this all the time.
right,
Silk is not a fabric.
no, silk is a fabric. Satin is not.
Silk's a fiber.
fiber,
Yeah.
Yeah, right. You know, it's nice to be able to add something shiny into your wardrobe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's nice enough that you're going to put forth the effort to learn how to work with it.
It's true.
This is a classic Chanel suit. It's a ready-to-wear suit. It's in a black and white woven boucle, and it's kind of got a boxy collarless jacket and a coordinated skirt with it. Okay, Gigi, what do you think of when you think of Chanel?
Chanel, particularly with her suit, was designed for comfort. She was a big proponent of knits, which made clothing more comfortable for women and less structure in the garment itself. So she was going for comfort. This would be a very comfortable garment to wear. And it was kind of like part of a rebellion against the cinched waist that other designers were using at that time. She just was going for comfort. And she did classic comfort.
we also have on the table a suit that Gigi made that we're going to ask her about that is inspired by the 1980s Chanel suit that we have from the collection. So you can see this kind of timeless silhouette, and we're going to ask Gigi about this because she not only constructed this suit beautifully, she actually wove the fabric herself before even making it, which is amazing that anyone even knows how to do that today. So what can you tell us about this kind of style of jacket?
Well, the Chanel jacket is a very comfortable garment to wear, and I'm sure I saw this garment in the collection, and it got into my subconscious, in the back of my subconscious, and then all of a sudden, when I took up weaving, I found this beautiful black and white yarn with slubs that I wove into this fabric, and with the intention of making a Chanel suit out of it. And what I did here was I took the yarn. I had a purchased trim, and I took the yarn and wove it through the trim before sewing it onto the fabric.
Fantastic.
To tie the two of them together. It's collarless. It has the little tiny pocket here that Chanel had in all her garments. And I just love this. And the fact that it was the black and white, I didn't consciously choose to do black and white, but this yarn was so wonderful that it just all came together.
Beautiful.
So it shows you how these things, something as timeless as this, never goes out of style. I could do this 50 years from now, and it would still be in style.
Gigi, did you tailor a Chanel suit for someone? Did you have a story where you tailored a Chanel suit with
A
someone?
couture Chanel.
Yes.
Oh, well, tell us about that. What did you notice about the couture version of Chanel when you worked on it?
I had a client who had a garment from the Shell Haute Couture atelier. And she brought it in to me to be altered because she had lost weight. And I said to her, why are you bringing this to me? Chanel will alter that for the rest of your life. She says, well, I want to wear it, and I'm not going to be in Europe this year. So I got to work on the inside of a Chanel garment, and there isn't a single machine stitch in it. The whole thing is done by hand. And because of all of the hand sewing, the seams are much softer. They're not as stiff and rigid as a machine stitch. So the garment is going to drape over your body and eventually form into the same shape. It's going to hang over your body and form into the same shape as your body.
Wow.
And the workmanship inside of it is just beautiful. So I was
it wool?
thrilled.
Was it wool?
Yes.
It was wool. Okay.
And it was probably a $30,000 suit.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, people could buy a house for that.
Back in the day, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I would make this suit 50 years from now. The style, you know, it's so classic that it will never go out of style.
Gigi, thank you so much for coming today, by the way. But why do you think fashion history is so important?
It's our history in fabric. We have history books that put our history in words and on paper. And the fabric is another form of memory. It tells us where we have been and what we have brought forward from previous times that we are using maybe in a different way now. But coming from the past as it did, it helped us to form the present day.
Why is it important that we preserve and take care of the fashion collection here at JCCC for the future?
So we don't make the same mistakes. We can learn from our mistakes. And we see some of the fashions that we may wish never happened. And we see some that we don't ever want to forget.
Oh, yes, yes. And you, when you taught, you had students that you showed them the collection, or maybe that you wanted to show them how the garment was constructed, and you used the collection in the classroom.
Oh, very definitely. This is such a treasure chest that we have. It would be impossible to duplicate. And we see some of the beautiful work of artisans that came before us that we can imitate if we choose to, and not lose that sense of rarity and quality that that artist put into that garment.
Yes.
Yes, these clothes have allowed us to see the history, and thank you for sharing your history through these clothes with us today.
Well,
It's really great.
it makes me recognize how much clothing has been a part of my life.
Yeah.
That started out as an absolute necessity. I only sewed because I was so small I could never get anything to fit. And it had become a major aspect of my life.
Yes, it still is.
And yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
You're still sewing.
And those clothes are telling your story and the story of history, which has been really great.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for including me.
Yes.
Thank you, Gigi.
Thanks.